guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Louisa. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and if you're coming back, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about something that you probably won't really find at the moment on the internet, but I have a feeling that at some point in the future people are going to realize that this is a thing, and that is future faking people pleasers. So this is when facade management or impression management of the nice guy persona sort of wanders into the territory of deception, but it's not intentional. So you may have come across the term future faking at some point if you've been researching things like narcissistic personality disorder. And this is very much one of the tools in the narcissistic arsenal, which they like to bring out to kind of lure people in. Future faking is essentially when you paint this rosy picture of the future. You make all of these promises which you have absolutely no intention of keeping, but they sound really good in the short term, and people are sucked in by the illusion. And so people like narcissists gain short-term rewards for things that they are never going to do. Future faking is one of those things that can lead to stuff like gambling addiction. So people have this idea that they're going to win big at some point in the future, and it keeps them gambling. It's also one of those things that tends to underpin stuff like scams and multi-level marketing schemes or pyramid schemes. Basically, it's the quintessential carrot on a stick, or you could think of it like a desert mirage. So how do you know that someone is future faking instead of just talking about their long-term plans? Because it could go either way. Someone might have really big plans for their future, but they have like concrete steps that they've kind of mapped out, and they have perhaps a timeline of when they want to achieve these things. Future faking, on the other hand, is a bit like trying to pin down a cloud, because you'll try and get details, you'll try and get concrete steps outlined, you'll try and get a time frame of some sort, and they won't commit to that particular thing. They won't commit to actually outlining how they intend for this thing to happen. So where do people pleasers fit into this category? Because they also future fake. So the future faking people pleaser, they don't have any malicious intent. They actually genuinely intend to do all of these things, or at least they tell themselves that they intend to do all of these things. But for this particular type of person, talk is all they have. Talk is cheap enough that they can splurge on everyone in the vicinity. And so they liberally apply promises without necessarily thinking through the consequences of what happens if they cannot fulfill those promises. So the chronic people pleasers, those are people who are so needy when it comes to the approval of other people that they are willing to essentially lie in the short term in order to reap the benefits. And they don't really think about the long-term ramifications of getting a reputation as someone who future fakes. So what is it about people pleasers that make them behave this way? Do they spend most of their life faking the niceness in order to be accepted? Do they morph their own identity so frequently to be appealing to other people that they actually don't have a very firm sense of who they are? And are they fundamentally lacking self-control and executive functioning? Well, the answer to all three of these is yes, and we're going to look at each one. So people pleasers tend to be so overly nice to people and so agreeable, no matter who the other person is, that it cannot possibly come from a genuine place. And on an instinctive level, a healthy person will pick up on this lack of real substance and genuine point of origin for all of the nice behavior. And they'll actually withdraw from it, they will retract from it. But the sorts of people who will fully embrace this kind of overly nice, unrealistic niceness are either narcissists who literally feed off of ego stroking and validation, or it tends to be people who have had their self-esteem so utterly shattered in the past that they are extremely needy for some kind of positive feedback, even when it's not real. In the study pictured below, they found that impression management is a tactic used by people attempting to ingratiate themselves with others, and these tactics can include performing favors for others. If a people pleaser cannot actually perform the favor, they still talk about volunteering to do the favor, then never actually do it. In the short term, it equates to facade management, but in the long term, they get a reputation for future faking. All of this niceness as a means of gaining reward is taxing on the people pleaser, which is why this study found a correlation between surface acting and alcohol consumption. Now, this was a study specifically on workplaces where people have to be very pleasant to unpleasant people, but this can also be applied within interpersonal relationships. So addiction can become a major issue for people pleasers because maintaining the fake nice persona is taxing and ultimately soul-crushing because it isn't who they really are. When people don't behave in genuine ways, they must release their true feelings somehow, somewhere else. They cannot blow up at their boss for exploiting their time, so they go home and drink. They cannot say no to their friends, so they go home and rip their partner a new one. This is the dark side of the people pleaser. They're actually not that nice underneath. It's kind of hard to imagine how toxic people pleasing actually is as a behavior, as a way of navigating relationships. It seems like something that is only potentially detrimental to the person who's doing it, but there is actually like blowout onto other people, not just the fact that they are essentially lying and being inauthentic, but there's other repercussions. And we're going to have a look at how people pleasers can become out of control. So when someone chronically people pleases, it's kind of like they place their self-worth into the hands of other people and then try to use manipulation to artificially inflate that sense of value. So they force other people to hyperinflate their sense of self-worth. But on the flip side of that, because they have handed over their self-worth to other people, ultimately they don't have any control over the value of who they are. They are totally dependent on the feedback of other people, and if they don't get positive feedback, if there's no payout for being so nice all the time, it's kind of like that Sylvia Plath novel where she's like, women are not kindness machines where you put coins in a slot until sex comes out. That's what people pleasing is. It's very transactional. And the thing is, you can't force people to give you what you want in the form of like validation. You can't make them. So the people pleaser is very out of control of their own self-worth. They don't really call the shots on that, which is why they're constantly working overtime to try and make other people like them. And because their behavior conforms so readily to other people's whims all the time, they kind of get to shirk a bit of accountability about the outcomes of their behavior. So in a weird way, they're off the hook. In this table from a study by Hart, It lists key behaviors of self-presentation tactics and what they look like. This list is usually associated with personality disorders such as narcissism, but people pleasers tend to fall into the highlighted categories of deceptive tactics as well. They're not narcissists, but they can behave in ways which are just as damaging to the people closest to them, simply because people pleasing is such a compulsion. By the way, I'm going to link in the description box a blog post that I did about this with all of the screenshots of the studies and all of the references, so you can check these out for yourself. So there's a few examples here of how they may avoid accountability for their decisions and how those decisions impacted on other people, because they are essentially slaves to being liked. They may apologize profusely and promise not to let it happen again, but it is such an addiction to be liked that they will be found a week later selling their wife's car to a friend for half of what it's worth and making her take the bus. Or they may promise to help someone move house, but then ensure that they have a work trip in that week and place an insurmountable obstacle in front of following through for people, thereby effectively future faking without being caught. Or they might exaggerate their skills in carpentry and offer to build a dog kennel for a friend, but 3 months later nothing has been done because the people pleaser is just so important and needed by others and busy, but it's still going to be the greatest dog kennel of all time. So many circumstances out of control for the people pleaser. They really wanted to do everything for everyone. They are a hapless victim of circumstances. But they are still the greatest guy that you have ever met. If they had have been able to, they would have totally done it. And that's awesome. And that is classic future faking. So what is it about the lack of personal integrity and the lack of identity formation which makes people pleasers behave in this way? At the end of the day, chronic people pleasers do not have a firm sense of self. Without positive feedback from other people, they actually can't regulate their own emotions. And this is all about maladaptive personality traits. In psychology, this is the average personality test which is used on people. It's known as the 5-factor model because there are 5 factors of personality, and it's also known by the acronym OCEAN, which are the first letters of all the 5 factors. So openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And most people fall somewhere on a sliding scale between various different factors. So for example, neuroticism, people will fall somewhere on a sliding scale between being overly sensitive and nervous or being quite confident and resilient. Same with extroversion, they will either be quite extroverted or quite introverted. Conscientiousness is likewise about being efficient and organized, or it might be about being careless and excessive. So there's the sliding scale for most people on this spectrum. When it comes to narcissism and other dark triad personality types or cluster B personality types, there's a different 5-factor model which is used by psychologists. And so this is referred to as just D, or dark personality, and it was originally based on a 2-factor model around lack of empathy and selfishness, and then psychologists did a factor analysis of the key traits within these particular overarching themes, and they realized that the lack of empathy can be broken down into callousness and sadistic. So some narcissists will be like literally out to get you, and some of them just don't care. And then there is the selfishness, which can be vindictive, it's usually always deceitful, and it's extremely entitled. This is not what we're actually talking about when it comes to people pleasers. They are neither of these particular 5-factor models of personality. They're a whole different model. So this is a different 5-factor model, which is probably more to do with borderline personality disorder and other types of exploitative behavior, which doesn't fit into narcissism because it's not overtly vindictive, it's just extremely selfish in a very benign kind of way. And it's a kind of selfishness that tends to be very morose. So with things like detachment, they'll have a lack of pleasure, depression, suppressed emotions, avoiding intimacy, withdrawal, and suspicion of others. Disinhibition is when they are distracted, impulsive, risk-taking. On the flip side, they might be extreme perfectionists, and they're also quite irresponsible. Under antagonism, they can be grandiose, they can be callous and deceitful, manipulative, and attention-seeking. And under negative affect, they're quite anxious, hostile, and being quite submissive to others, which is a very people-pleaser type of behavior, where it kind of diverges into things like borderline personality is when we get to emotional lability, which is where someone switches emotions very quickly. They go through a quick succession of mood swings. And perseveration, which is a repetitive speech or behavior and an inability to switch tasks. It's often from a brain injury or other frontal lobe dysregulation. It's a bit like a fembot glitching out, but essentially it's when someone is unable to read social context and they can't tell that other people have moved on in the conversation, that sort of thing. And lastly, there's psychoticism, which does not really fit into the mold of the people pleaser. It's definitely more along the lines of borderline personality disorder. So things like eccentric behavior, strange beliefs, and perceptual dysregulation, it's not something that they generally suffer from. Instead, the traits that really stand out when it comes to a future-faking people pleaser is a suppression of their own emotions, being quite distracted, impulsive. They tend to be very easily influenced by other people around them in the effort to people please. They're also quite keen on perfectionism, but at the same time they're quite irresponsible because they want everyone else to give them feedback. They can be quite grandiose, and people pleasing is actually quite manipulative because it's demanding validation from other people. And as part of that, they become anxious and they're also very submissive to other people's opinions. As I said before, they place their sense of self and their sense of self-worth in the feedback that they receive from other people. So this is what they base their identity on. And because they have abandoned their own responsibility for their actions in favor of simply responding to other people's expectations of them, they tend to not exercise self-control. So they have this severe lack of self-control, which in psychology is known as executive functioning. As you can see from this study, they invest too heavily in a fantasy version of themselves and others which does not exist, and in the attempt to perpetuate a myth, they switch off their executive function, which staves off the emotional dysregulation they experience when reality intrudes on the daydream. This then makes them just as damaging as a real narcissist to a partner who is also forced into the slavery of the fantasy life and who may be bearing the brunt of re-regulating their spouse's emotions at the back end of operations. In terms of their romantic tendencies, according to this study, they will tend towards a combination of eros and mania love styles, which was something that we talked about very briefly in the last video that I made on different biblical love languages. So the combination of mania and eros is when you encounter someone who sweeps you off your feet in a whirlwind of romantic future faking where everything is rose-tinted and nothing is impossible. Where the people pleaser diverges from the narcissist is that they fully intend to see this fantasy play out, which is why their sincerity can be disarming for so many people. However, their future aspirations are not grounded in reality and cannot be attained. So in order to cope with the disconnect between reality and fantasy, they often do certain behaviors like procrastination. They will manufacture obstacles. There's always a litany of ready-made excuses for why something can't happen or what is preventing something from happening. And when that fails, they tend to mentally check out of relationships. Like, they don't necessarily see their partner as a real person. So they're not connected to how the other person genuinely feels because they're not connected to how they genuinely feel. And when one fake future is finally done and dusted with, like they know that it's not going to eventuate, then they will immediately latch on to the next big thing and they will be selling cloud real estate to everyone they know. And people will often buy into it because of their enthusiasm. So they might not have bad intentions and they might be a really great person in lots of different ways, but they make terrible life partners. If you settle down with someone like this, you are going to constantly struggle with creating concrete plans and setting timelines. Like, the goalposts will constantly be shifting further and further away from what is achievable. And not only that, but because they are so compulsively in people pleaser mode all the time, all of your resources and all of your time will be dedicated towards maintaining this facade and this image to other people. So how do you spot this early? These were the red flags that I saw early on and I should have paid attention to before marrying someone like this. Okay, so these are some of the personality trait red flags that you might be able to see during dating and keep an eye out for. Number one is that they talk incessantly about what they're going to do rather than what they are doing. A lot of what they're talking about will be somewhat detached from reality. The plans will be incredibly grandiose. And then on the flip side of these really grandiose plans that they will be talking about a great deal, you'll often find that they are quite indecisive and unwilling to commit to taking action on something. And this can be things that are quite minor. So if they have a lot of trouble deciding what they want to eat or what they want to wear or where it is that they want to go on an evening out or something like that, sometimes they might be so paralyzed by indecision that they actually end up doing nothing. But usually what will happen is they will start depending on you in order to make decisions for them. And so this is where it gets into the category of shirking responsibility and foisting it onto someone else. So if you start dating someone and they enthusiastically start adopting all of your long-term dreams and goals as though those dreams and goals are their own, but then they blow them out into massive proportions to the degree that they no longer become attainable and you can't make actual steps towards them, that's a sign. If you start dating someone and they are so agreeable with your opinions and point of views on things to the degree that it kind of seems like they didn't even form their own opinions before having met you, that's a warning sign. My advice is disengage immediately. Like, this is not going to change. This is not going to improve because this person fundamentally does not have a firm grip of reality. And at first, when you're dating them, they might be very keen to people please you, but then when you actually get to be their lifelong partner, they kind of abuse you the way that they abuse themselves. So they use you and all of your resources in order to achieve their people-pleasing goals. And this is why when it comes to dating, you kind of need to go slowly. Don't let these people sweep you up in the whole eros mania mayhem. And when it comes to breaking up with them, they will promise so many things that they will not deliver on. They either can't deliver on them or talk is so cheap that they are just happy to lie. So what advice would I give to the chronic people pleasers out there who are future faking as a way to get by? Well, first of all, you need to start grounding yourself in reality, where there is a finite amount of resources like time, money, attention, and energy. You're not a machine, you're a human being. Other people are not machines either. They have real feelings and experience real consequences when they trust your fantasy construct. Learn to let go of the escapism and fantasy. Stop hiding in your daydreams and start showing up in the real world. The real is so much better than the fake, including all of the ugly and difficult parts of it. Real life is not easy. It's disappointing, it's a struggle, it'll beat you down sometimes. Everyone goes through this, and it makes those times when we achieve something so much sweeter, and those relationships based on authenticity are so much stronger, more reliable, and more fulfilling. Don't trade authenticity for fantasy. Don't live in cloudland. If you do, you'll cheat yourself out of real love. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully that was helpful. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you have any experience of this in your own life, or if you have some other ideas about what it means to people please, I would love to hear it. In the meantime, take care of yourself and take care of your relationships. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I will see you next time. Bye.